Nawat Guanawaradu Sewa Guego. On this edition of the Aunties Dandelion, we visit with Six Nations of the Grand River, Gunyunge Haga Auntie Elizabeth Doxtater, also known as Betts. Betts is an artist, author, cornhusk doll maker, and educator, focused on restoring responsibilities and action for all involved in the treaties that exist on Turtle Island. Her art and writings are provocative and full of great love. She's reimagined and repurposed the paintings of Johannes Vermeer, Vincent van Gogh, and other European artists while establishing a vast body of original work that brings important perspective, protest, and clarity.
So it's just like, quit taking from us. Quit taking from us. This is like a very silent and hopefully beautiful way to protest.
After a devastating car accident years ago, Betts began making cornhusk dolls in intricate detail as a way to heal her body and mind, and now uses the dolls to explore the dynamic teachings of our Haudenosaunee Confederacy.
We're at a really important place in history now, because what they tried to destroy is still here, is salvageable, it's healable, right? And so that's where we are.
Betts says that when we speak to each other, our words should go into each other's ears like drops of medicine. And that is exactly my experience as I visit with her. I'm Gusto Saraguate, and we are Yetinistaha Nede Garunya Ganare, the Aunties Dandelion. We're focused on revitalizing our communities through stories of land, language, and relationships. And we want to say Nyawagoa, or big thanks, to Canada's Indigenous Screen Office, De Yunki Wista Genha, for making this podcast possible through their new media fund. We make space here for real conversations to unfold like we're visiting in our communities. So take a breath, make some tea, and listen to your aunties. And when you're done, please follow us, provide some feedback, and share these visits with others. It helps us continue these times together. There we go. And we're rolling. Hi.
Hi.
How are you?
Pretty good.
Good. Could you introduce yourself and just tell us a little bit about yourself, where we are right now?
My name is Elizabeth Doxtater. We're at my house on Six Nations. I was born on Six Nations and I was raised here, and I'm still here.
And what is it about Six Nations, would you say, kind of as a physical, how would you describe it to people who are not from here?
Growing up, it was called the Six Nations Indian Reserve. And I think now it's changed a little bit and people are calling it like our territory, or there's different kinds of words that they use to describe it. But I think there's that continuity when your family was here and you're still here. So it is an Indian reserve. There's a nickname that people have always called it, and that's the bush. And so it's just home.
Yeah. And why do they call it the bush? I don't even know.
I don't even really know.
Yeah.
It's just been a nickname. And, you know, like there's lots of farmland, lots of plowed fields and stuff. So I think there's a lot of trees in comparison to off the reserve. But it's just a nickname, I think.
Yeah. And maybe compared to like Hamilton or Toronto, or you can still see it from space, right?
Yeah. And I think people that study like the environment, that they find that there's different things because of like hunting and that there's different like indigenous plant life that is more easily found in the community. So, it's all kind of connected and interwoven, all that information.
I met you first through this beautiful store that you have in downtown Oswego called Everything Cornhusk. Can you tell me about that store and the art that is in that store and where that came from? And then we can go on to your other multifaceted ways of being in the world.
I was in a really bad car accident about 16 years ago. And when I was recovering from that, I really turned towards art forms, including painting, drawing, writing, and making cornhusk dolls. And making cornhusk dolls turned into making cornhusk doll dioramas that represented parts of the stories and the teachings. And so as I was kind of exploring those art forms, my house started to fill up with all of that. So cornhusk dolls and paintings and pieces of beadwork. And around the same time, that little shop in Oswego at the Village Plaza came up for rent. And so we looked into it and decided that we would open up a little shop there. So that's how the store ended up being there.
Maybe first describe what a cornhusk doll is for people who don't know what it is.
Like for me, it goes back to the time of creation when they talk about how that corn grew out of the grave of Sky Woman's daughter and how that cornhusk protected the seeds that were on that plant. And so now that cornhusk is used for different things, household items, ceremony. And in this case, they're also used to make cornhusk dolls. And so the cornhusk dolls are just basically dolls that are made out of wrapped cornhusk. And the different doll makers will have different techniques for making them.
How did that interact with how you were feeling physically at the time?
Well, I felt useless. Because I couldn't move. Both of my legs were broken and I was not mobile at all. I was in a wheelchair for actually quite a few years. So when I was trying to recover from that, there was a couple of things. One was trying to keep my mind busy because I didn't want to do a couple of things. One was taking painkillers. And the other thing was taking antidepressants. So I didn't want to do that. And my understanding was I was hearing people talk about the Great Law. Everything you need is in the Great Law. And yet I didn't have anyone to talk to about what that meant. So I was just exploring it from that art form, making those dioramas and looking at them and thinking about it and trying to figure out how this could be something that isn't just something that's set on a shelf or something where you hear someone talk about it and then and that's the extent of it, that it ends up being something that you can use every day. And so how do we do that? So that was part of my own research into cornhusk dolls and stories from the Great Law, stories from creation, and how we can use those things as part of our own protection.
How does that end up being a protection?
It's like having something, setting small goals, right? So it's a protection because you have something that you're working on that is important to finish. So it's like regulating yourself instead of just laying in bed, watching TV all day, that you're able to set small goals. But for me, part of those small goals were actually even to preserve or understand some of the teachings that had been deprived, coming from that era of day schools and residential schools, and knowing that many generations of many families were impacted directly to the point where there was a fear to even talk about those things, to even think about them. So kind of coming out of that dark place and coming into a place where you can talk about them, you can explore them and experience them. So that in itself was part of that healing. And that protection had to do with that regulation, right? It had to do with the fact that you're doing something, and people were starting to know what I was doing and would come and visit me and talk to me about the dolls I was making and inviting me out to talk about them. So, and that ended up being like quite a surprise because I wasn't expecting that.
I mean, I can't even keep up with how many dolls you're making every day you're making them, it seems like. Okay, maybe that's the question. You're like, no, I don't know how many.
No.
But it's hundreds and hundreds, isn't it?
Yeah, because it went from being, making like very formal dolls, that represented very specific parts of the teachings, to understanding that just the process of making a doll itself and sharing that experience of touching the husk and trying to bring that relationship with that husk to anyone who wants to make a doll, there was something significant in there, right? And there was something healing in there. So it was just so many things. It wasn't just like just making a cornhusk doll. It was really understanding how that process of making a doll in itself, using the husk, was part of protecting something that could have easily been lost. I think it's like protecting your mind because you're making small incremental steps towards something, right? And so doing that is important. Again, like rather than just allowing yourself to sit around and feel sorry for yourself, how horrible that this thing happened to me, right? Instead of focusing on that, it's like, how can I contribute? Right. And so it's like, well, I can contribute by learning these things and by sharing them. And so that became part of it too, was like not just making the dioramas and not just understanding it, but having opportunities to go out and talk about them and share what I found and discuss it with people, right? Because there's always that reciprocity where it's not like, oh, I know and now I know. It wasn't like that. It's like, this is what I know, this is what I understand. Is this correct? Or is there something else that's missing? I never call myself a knowledge holder. I'm really a self-guided student. I never call myself like an elder or anything like that. It's like I'm really learning. I'm actively learning. And the other reason is because I don't speak the language. So it's like there's a big chunk of understanding or that context that's missing for me. So I explain it as best I can in English. And that kind of goes back to when I was trying to learn about these teachings. It's like, okay, I don't have the language. And I had to go through a process of a little bit of my own healing because I had to give myself permission to be able to try to understand these things and express them in English. So what I came up with from that was the metaphor of a snake bite. If you get bit by a poisonous snake and you get rushed to the hospital, the medicine that they inject to fight the poison in that snake bite is actually the same venom that the snake has. So it's like, okay, well, if I take that as a model to use, then how can we use for now until our languages become strong and healthy again? How do I use the English language to be part of the cure?
Yeah. Oh, wow. Could you describe some of the more elaborate dioramas and the work that goes into the dolls that you're creating? It's not just the doll itself, but you outfit them. There's regalia.
And that was part of the research, right? Like, because I don't know. I've never seen it. Well, okay, so I'll go back to what happened was I was sitting in a class in Dundas, in the Dundas Valley School of Art, and one of the instructors was showing a slideshow. And he showed the slide of the Last Supper. So I'm sitting there and I'm looking at, he's talking, but I'm not actually even listening to him. And I'm thinking, I wonder if there's anybody on the planet that would see that painting and not know what it represented. So I wonder if we had anything like that. I wonder what it would have looked like. I wonder what it would have been made out of. And so it was like looking at that slide and realizing that maybe there are things that are missing that we're not even aware that they're missing, right? So what if we had that? What if we had someone who created a cornhusk doll diorama at one point that represented the stories of Peacemaker, the stories of creation, and traveled to the different villages and talked about them and showed them and taught cornhusk dolls? What if that was something? And we don't know, because I think that if that was true and if that was the case, those would have been some of the first things that were destroyed, right?
Right.
So then it was like always coming back to, okay, well, that doesn't mean we can't do it now. So maybe that's what I'll do. So one of the pieces that I did was the Peacemaker's Journey. And Peacemaker's Journey, again, it wasn't the whole thing because I was in healing mode at the time. They were snapshots that were significant to me, right? That stood out. So when I'd make a doll, thinking about what is a material that would have been as close to the ancestors' time. So in that big piece of the Peacemaker's Journey, the dolls where they have like leather leggings and moccasins and breechcloths, they're done with a brain tan hide. Mm. So when I first made them, because they're getting kind of old now, but you could smell it, right? And so that became just kind of another level of the doll experiencing them. And so I also tried to put earrings on them and a choker and braid their hair. One of the things that is subtle, but it's obvious when you know, but when you don't know, you wouldn't notice. So they all have braided headbands on, all of my men. Mm-hmm. So what I did was I took a piece of brain tan hide and I cut it and I braided it and then I put that on as a headband. And so within that little practice there was my understanding that part of the great law is protecting your mind, right? Learning how to protect your mind. And with that, there's 3 guiding principles of the great law. And you know that I would feel better because you're a speaker, because I won't have the correct pronunciation. That peace, power, and a good mind.
Skana gatnikun rio and gazet stansara.
Yeah. So those 3 are infused in that headband, right? Those 3 braided pieces. For me, that's the way I understood it. And so it was significant and important that those go on those men, the male dolls.
Yeah.
And so they all have those. And again, like I say, it was like a little piece of the great law that was embedded in there for me, right? It might not be anything like, you're not going to find it written down anywhere.
Yeah.
But that's the way that I express that.
Well, and I think that's so important, Bets, because we are alive and dynamic. A lot of people try to put us in the past. And it feels like what you're saying is we are here now and we can still be part of a dynamic expression of this art. We don't have to always go back and not add ourselves to it. So it feels like what you're doing is giving people and yourself permission to add to that as a tradition and just keep it dynamic, right?
Yeah, well, when they talk about fine art, usually it's like paintings from Europe, and that's fine art. And what we do is craft. And it's like, if anybody is responsible for presenting this to the world as fine art, it's us. It's our responsibility. And to encourage that understanding. So there's that part. And then the other part is that I kind of snuck the cornhusk doll image into what is known as fine art, right? So I did a piece called Mona Lisa Made a Basket. And I took, I take it you've seen it?
Yes, I love it so much.
It's,
I think that's when I really started realizing, like, this woman has a lot going on. It's amazing.
So Mona Lisa Made a Basket is a picture of Mona Lisa, but I removed her face and I turned her into a cornhusk doll. I also placed a basket in her hands, and I have her sitting in a longhouse.
Gorgeous. We're looking at it now in your living room. And then next to it is the cornhusk lady with the pearl.
So what happened was it ended up becoming kind of a theme. And I thought, well, all of these paintings that are kind of presented to the world as the ideal of standard of beauty. And in the story of the cornhusk doll, she doesn't have a face, right? And so it's like beauty ends up being something that's really subjective to like physical features. But if you take it back into, base it on that story, the story of the cornhusk doll, where her face is removed because she's not doing what she's supposed to be doing, and she's not utilizing the gifts that she was actually given, right? And so she has kind of like walked away from her actual duties and just sat by the water staring at herself. So I did a couple of them. I did, it's called Girl with a Pearl Earring, and I changed her into a cornhusk doll, and I put a wampum earring on her. So she's cornhusk girl with a wampum earring. I call it reverse colonialism. Yeah. So there's so many things from our culture and our people and our ancestors that were taken and claimed as theirs, that I thought, well, what the heck, let's do the same thing. So my hope is that kids that are growing up now in the community and they walk past the shop and they see Mona Lisa holding the basket she made, or cornhusk girl with a wampum earring, they see that and they grow up knowing that those are images from this community.
What have been the reactions to these paintings?
Well, it's been pretty good. I think, people have kind of stopped and went, wait, what? Let me get a second look at that. Because there was 2 other ones. There's one called, I think, Lady with Ermine. And I changed the ermine into a corncob. And then there's another one called Unidentified Woman in a Red Dress. And I also changed her into a cornhusk doll. So it's just like, quit taking from us. Quit taking from us. This is like a very silent and hopefully beautiful way to protest.
You have a really deep understanding of art. both from our Haudenosaunee perspective, but also from a Western perspective. Where do you get your understanding of the Western art?
Well, remember what I said, I'm a self-guided student.
Yeah.
Right? So it's like really watching and seeing what people are looking at and valuing as art, and understanding that I'm not just a witness to these times, I'm also a contributor. So it's like, what can I contribute? The Ontario College of Teachers commissioned me a few years ago to paint representations of the 4 ethical standards of the teaching profession, right? So it's like, okay, here's an opportunity that you're going to make a significant statement. And how do you do that? Because there's care, trust, respect, and integrity. How do you take a snapshot of all of the teachings and history and culture and symbols and find one snapshot? And so that was really, I don't know if the word is difficult, but it's because you almost have to just like draw a line and go, okay, I think this will do it, right? So that's where they came from. So I had to sit and scratch my head quite a bit, right? Like honestly, and try to figure out how I can do that. So if you're talking about care, when everything in our teachings, everything is all about care.
Yeah.
Right? So how do you take a snapshot of that and make it represent that, where people are going to be able to recognize it and make those connections between the picture and what it's supposed to represent? So
care is washing corn. And how is this being used? This is being used to train teachers.
Yeah, that's
right?
available at the college, yeah.
And then respect is the white pine. So maybe explain that.
This was also released in 2019, which was the International Year of Indigenous Languages. So the artist statements that I submitted with that were also translated into Mohawk.
Wonderful.
The college's definition of the ethical standard of respect included members honor human dignity, emotional wellness, cognitive development. So to me, that was like when they talk about skana or peace, they talk about having a healthy mind, right? In their professional practice, they model respect for spiritual and cultural values, social justice, confidentiality, freedom, democracy, and the environment. So when I thought about that, I was like, again, like I say, it's like, what?
Right. How do you...
What?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I thought, well, when they talk about the Great Law and they talk about that white pine, and that white pine represents that peace, right? So it's green year round. It never sleeps. Those 4 white roots that go out to the 4 directions, that underground river that takes those weapons away, that, and they're in their definition, they talk about social justice and confidentiality and, human dignity, emotional wellness, all those things that would be, again, infused into peace, having a healthy mind and having a healthy body. So for me, it just made sense that the white pine would be that. Anyone who seeks that peace can follow one of those roots and find that protection under that tree. And that even the weapons that were thrown into that pit, to me, it changed from being just physical weapons, right? Understanding that anything can be weaponized. Harmful words can be weaponized. Harmful images can be weaponized. So we have to really be always aware of the things that we're sharing with each other, because when we speak to each other, our words should go into each other's ears like drops of medicine, right? Because it's really easy to have sharp words that are going to feel more like shards of glass than anything. So, and then that one's integrity. And integrity was actually the easiest one to figure out.
Gorgeous.
Because it's cornhusk, right? So cornhusk has protected the integrity of those seeds since the time of creation. If you're in a classroom, you're going to have people, I'll say in your care, that the relationships, some of them are predictable. So on that painting, you can see there's corn and then there's beans and squash on the bottom.
Oh, that's
so
gorgeous.
According to the culture, that's predictable, right? But the other side of that painting, the white celestial tree, is something that is unknown. It's not really understood. It's not a tangible thing. So if you're a teacher and you have students or learners in your classroom that have relationships that you've never experienced. Maybe there's a probation officer maybe there's medical care people. Maybe there's things that you're just not used to, right? That when they're in your care, you still protect the integrity.
And then the ethical standard of trust, grandmother moon and cornstalks.
Right. So in there, they talk about the relationships with students, colleagues, parents, guardians, and the public are based on trust. So again, it's like trust. How do you show that? And what I thought about was the creation, at the time of creation, when the sky woman eventually becomes our grandmother moon. And from her daughter's grave were those 3 plants, corn, beans, and squash. And so part of building trust is to be predictable, right? And if you're predictable, that is going to help with gaining or earning that trust. So the corn that you plant, Grandmother Moon is responsible for deciding when babies are going to be born, deciding when we plant and harvest, taking care of the waters, all of those things. With that promised new life will always be here, right? So when the moon is predictable in those cycles, those 28-day, 13 lunar cycles, that corn is able to grow and able to provide that sustenance for the people.
This is available on what website so people can go? Like, is it publicly available?
Yep. On the Ontario College of Teachers.
Okay. And what should they look for?
You probably even my name would bring it up too.
So,
but you can look under the 4 ethical standards, because there's another one too. There's another artist named Jackson Beardy, and he did the Anishinaabe ones.
Oh, beautiful. Yeah. So then this goes to Indigenous and non-Indigenous teachers, right?
Yep.
And have you had feedback of how this art has affected people, or how this document has affected? Because this is so powerful.
Yeah, a little bit. Like, I know that some people have printed them off, and even with the artist statement, both in English and in Mohawk. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, there's been some feedback. I think it kind of got overshadowed by the other document. So,
okay.
But I mean, it's still there. But so I'm usually one going, yeah, but did you know there was another one?
There was a precursor?
Yeah.
Yeah. You had the one document about the ethical standards, and now we're looking at another document that has what seems to be a Van Gogh inspired cover to it. And you actually wrote this document as well on a writing team, correct?
Yeah. So the document is called Restorative Journey, Indigenous Educational Wellness. And what we had identified was that unlike the TRC, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, there was a commissioner named, there was a commission set up, there were a number of interviews across the country and documents being released. The same wasn't happening for Indian day schools. Basically, the only thing that happened was they announced that there was going to be a class action lawsuit, and there was a website, and pretty much the only thing on there was the application. So there was a space missing. There was no kind of current literature that was being released. So when I was at the college and we started working on this, I was trying to work on it in a proactive way, because it's easy to, I don't know if it's easy. Some people choose to really focus on helping people feel guilty or shame or something. And so that wasn't the focus. My understanding of those treaties is that they're based on peace, friendship, and respect. And so when we're trying to heal from something, it is not really helpful if we're going to concentrate on those things, right? Like guilt and shame.
You mean even for the other side?
Well, for both, yeah, as treaty partners, right?
Yeah.
So because we can't say, well, okay, so this is part of the problem. We talk about the treaties and how they've been broken and violated, and that's true. But they were based on eternal peace, friendship, and respect. So what are we supposed to do now? Are we supposed to just focus on the fact that they were broken? I think the two-row wampum is an example of that, because if you look at the two-row and you hold it up sideways, it looks like a mathematical equal sign. But if you look at it lengthwise and you think of the ancestors that placed that canoe in that river, and all those things that they expected each generation to protect as they travel down that river, then that places a responsibility on us, not to complain that the other side broke the treaty, but to have that, to recognize that we have a responsibility to honor our ancestors by continuing to protect those things that are in that canoe. So my understanding is that the generation that is holding that paddle and steering that canoe is preparing to hand that paddle to the next generation.
Can you describe the Turo Rompum to people who don't know it?
So the Turo is a white belt and it has 2 purple lines. My understanding is that when it was first endorsed or agreed upon at the time of the endorsement of the Great Law or the ratification of the Great Law. And so it's supposed to represent 2 vessels being side by side as equals, right? Equally respecting each other. And then later on in 1613, that it was an agreement between the Haudenosaunee and the Dutch. And later on, it was followed by the French and the British, so that it symbolized that the 2 vessels could live side by side, treating each other as equals and respecting those things that define nationhood status: language, culture, ceremony, governance, and territory. And so now it can be used as evidence to, it's true. It was violated. I speak English. I don't speak my language. And so it takes away from our responsibility as participants and contributors, right? To just focus on that victimization.
Yeah.
We're victims of that being broken.
And point the fingers away. Yeah. Yeah.
And so, but the reality is, if we look back at those ancestors that placed that canoe in that river, then we are contributors. We are participants. And so we're at a really important place in history now, because what they tried to destroy is still here, is salvageable, it's healable, right? And so that's where we are.
Those thoughts are what you put into this document. And can you also describe the difference between the day schools and the residential schools, right? We had the TRC, and then this is to address the damage from the day schools. Is that what I'm understanding?
Yeah.
Okay.
So. Well, sort of address, like you can't get away from the damage, right?
Right.
But it was to focus on how we take steps forward. I was talking to someone and they were saying, because day school survivors are actually residential school survivors. And I was like, no, we got to go home. And they were like, well, where did you live? Well, I was like, I lived on the reserve. They said, you lived on a reserve. You went to school within a reserve. And I'm like, yeah. And so then it just like hits me like, oh, okay, this is so normalized for us.
Right.
That we don't even realize that the reserves were set up supposed to be like concentration camps. And we went to school within there. So when we got to go home at night, we were still going home within that system.
Within that prison.
Yeah. And I just never, this was like maybe a couple of weeks ago that it was like a light bulb.
So you are a day school survivor.
Yeah, but even that feels funny to say that, right?
Okay.
So the thing is, again, going back to using those English words as medicine, right? And understanding that we are all survivors. We all lived under that genocidal legislation. They use that genocidal or that legislative abuses against our people. And so understanding it, but it doesn't help anyone, right? So when I start really understanding or trying to understand the words that I was understanding that were like, yeah, that's what happened, genocide and what was the other ones, subjugation and all of those things. And it's like they seem to fit parts that were missing. So when you come from a community or a society that has historically been oppressed, no one sits you down and explains what that means, right?
Yeah.
So then when you start hearing those words, they fill a space, but they're all from a deficit view, right? And so it's like, that doesn't do anything to help.
Yeah.
And so going back to the cover of this document, the painting that I did was, well, how do I voice this? How do I express this? And so if you look at this on the right-hand side, there's a white pine.
Yes.
Right? But you're already standing at the base of it. You're standing there. So you followed it back. You already did that part. Over to the left, there's a palisade, and it sort of looks like a turo wampum.
Oh, yeah.
Inside, there's a small little schoolhouse in there, right? So if we take control of that education system and are protected by those agreements that our ancestors put in place, then no matter what's going on, just like Van Gogh's Starry Night with all the wild colors and the big lines in the sky, no matter what's going on around you, that we can use those agreements, those treaties, to help straighten our mind like the smoke that rises.
Just beautiful.
So this was more about healing than dredging up everything. Everything's still there. The memories are still there.
And it's not about ignoring that.
No. It's about how do we walk forward together and really in a good way. There's so much confusion about how to address things. So like in schools, when they're kind of like, I wouldn't say mandated, strongly recommended to address things that can be really awkward for them. And, to be able to provide something that's a bit of hope that they can gain an understanding of some of the things that are experienced in our communities. It goes back to that part where there's so many people that will focus on the guilt and the anger.
Yeah.
And that doesn't really help anybody. And it's also a real personal thing. I was in a workshop. I'll just say this anyways, even though you might cut it out. So I was in a workshop. It was one of those blanket exercises. Mm-hmm. Afterwards, they passed the microphone around, and this one woman, she was a treaty partner person, right? She was not Indigenous. And she said, I just feel so guilty and I feel so ashamed. And I was sitting there thinking, you're using all that energy up. That's all about you.
It is.
It doesn't help anybody.
It's still centering her.
Yeah. And so I said that. And the minister actual Anglican minister, who was the mediator or whatever, I said, that's all about you. That doesn't help anybody. And she said, you have the right to your feelings. And I was like, yeah, you have the right to your feelings, but it's not helping anybody.
In this restorative journey, what are you recommending in this document?
What happened with the Truth and Reconciliation, the final report, there were 94 calls to action.
Yeah.
Where are the calls to action for day school?
Yeah.
There are none. And so, well, let me tell you about the 94 calls to action from the TRC. So Maurice Sinclair had this opportunity. Everybody was listening. And he called upon the churches, and he called upon the government, and he called upon museums, and he called upon a lot of organizations that created the situation in the first place, right? He missed a spot, I think, because he had an opportunity to say, and finally, we have to call upon each other. We have to welcome each other home. We have to extend our arms to you if you want to come home, to know that you were missed and that you're loved and that you'll be protected when you're home. And we didn't do that. He didn't do that. And so it's like, we have to do that.
And are you saying doing that for each other? Like as Indigenous communities?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Finding some way, even if nothing exists.
Yeah.
Right. So there's so many reasons why people were taken away, or they were displaced from their own community. Right. And maybe have made home, with a different community because that's where they are and that's all they know. Right. And so creating that as part of our norm to say, you're home now. Right. And we don't do that. And Sinclair didn't do that, right? And that's why I say he missed a spot. So, actually, that's why I wrote the Call to Action 95.
Oh. Right?
Mm-hmm. And so in Call to Action 95, it says, let's call upon ourselves to remember what the TRC represents and celebrate this first step towards protecting the children. Let's call upon ourselves to create a time for the children and adults who have been taken away from our communities for whatever reason to be welcomed home, repatriating them so that they know they were missed and they know that when they return home, they will be loved and protected.
And that's in the book, The Art of Peace.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're so prolific. My goodness.
Well, then when we were writing the document at the college, it was like, okay, so there's no calls to action. So in the back of this document, there is a section where you can actually write your own call to action. It's page 84, identifying calls to action and personal principles for professional life. And it just has a number of steps in there. Understanding my role as a treaty partner, how I am engaging in this partnership, how is my call to action supporting this relationship, and there's like a number of them. And then a section that just says, my calls to action are. When we call non-Indigenous people treaty partners, it implies that there's a responsibility there.
Yes.
Right? Everybody has a responsibility to uphold those treaties, just like the dish with one spoon. With the dish with, I know it's, the name is a little bit messed up because there's like, well, there's no spoon, it's just a dish, it's just a dish, so whatever it's called.
Which is another wampum.
Yeah,
treaty.
It's a wampum belt. So It talks about how we have the right to utilize the entities or the resources on Mother Earth's body, that we have a responsibility to share those with others. And then we have a responsibility to protect the earth so that future generations will be able to practice the same right. They're treaty partners in that. So we all have a responsibility there. Call it an environmental message. They have a responsibility just as much as we have a responsibility. And so when you see all of these protests about, protecting land for different reasons or fighting these pipelines that they're trying to get to swallow up the earth, that comes from the original instruction, and they're actually part of the protection. Their people, their ancestors agreed to that.
And it really does change the conversation, because often you call people settlers or allies. And I don't feel comfortable really with any of those. Like you said, they're not very descriptive. So how do you use the English language as a medicine?
So, and the one that I really gives me like, is when people refer to them as settlers.
Yeah.
Because when you think of the word settler, if you had muddy water and you waited it to settle down, or if kids are running around, bouncing around, and you tell them to settle down, there's like a positive tone in there. And so settlers are doing something good and kind, and it's going to be nice now because it's settled.
Yeah, it sounds so lovely.
Yeah, and it's like, things haven't been really settled since you guys got here.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's a misleading word, right? And I also think it's kind of it's intended to be a little bit sarcastic.
Yeah.
And it's like, I just don't think we need to do that. They're supposed to be treaty partners. That's supposed to be the law.
You're changing my whole brain right now. Yeah.
The intent was that teachers in schools and principals and everyone will understand that they can have a responsibility, because I think that's part of it, is that people that here's the other thing, when they use that word reconciliation, right? So let's get this straight. So there was this imbalance in this relationship where our people were basically displaced and dismissed and everything. At some point, somebody decided that they were going to at least create the illusion that was going to stop. So let's put it in real basic terms. Let's say there's a couple and one's very abusive and has all the power to be abusive, and then one day decides that they're going to stop being abusive. And so they say, okay, that's it. We're going to reconcile now. It's like anybody that's taken social work 101 would go, that's not how you reconcile.
Right.
Because I've heard like other Native people saying, because I know we have to participate in reconciliation. And I'm like, no, we don't. No. Did you get a form saying, check 1 if you want to reconcile and check 2 if you don't? They told us that. That was mandated. And it's like, that's not how it works. Right? So if we're actually going to heal this history and heal what happened to our people, then this is just the start of the conversation, really. Right. But that's not our word.
What is our work?
Well, it goes back to those treaties. We have to understand them, right? Because we can say, oh, they broke the treaties. Well, which treaties? We have to know. We have to know which treaties. And so that's an important part, because that's what the laws were based on. The relationships were based on. The United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Children, I believe, were endorsed in 1959. And yet the last residential school never closed until 1996. And yet residential schools wasn't taken out of the Indian Act until 2014. There's a pattern of something that's not good. And so how are we supposed to proceed in good faith that you actually want to reconcile?
And what do you think of the Vatican's recent repudiation of the doctrine of discovery, if you have
Oh, I do.
thoughts on that?
I actually have a poem on that.
You do?
Yeah.
Can you read it?
Yeah, I have to go grab it. Okay. If that's okay.
That's totally okay.
Okay.
This is just so... I don't really have words for what this is, Beth. It's really beautiful.
What's that?
I just don't really have words for what this is. Like, this perspective is so important. It's so powerful.
Which part?
I mean, it's a bunch of different perspectives, how you take art and turn it back on colonization and turn it back on itself, how you really can articulate how art can protect us and what it's doing by step protecting our minds. And when I think about watching TikToks at night or whatever, it's like, am I protecting my mind?
Right.
I just love what you said about the headband, and that helps me visualize what I should be doing in protecting my, like the Gatnigun Rio.
It's the same thing as this. It's
Yeah.
the same thing as that palisade, because in that great law... Oh, is that on?
Yeah.
Okay. So when they talk about that palisade that surrounded our villages, they had to be invited in. So
Yeah.
they would make a fire outside of that palisade, and they would send runners out there to see what they wanted. They would talk to them and bring that message back in. If it was going to be helpful, they could invite that person in. And if it wasn't going to be helpful, they would not invite them in. So that was something that I had to learn to do for myself when I was healing from that accident, right? So there were so many things that happened. Like, I looked different. I got hit on my cheek, and the swelling has never gone down. I had these big scars, and it's like, how do I protect my mind from not just having this like eternal pity party now?
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And so that was part of it, understanding that palisade and that role that it played, because then it was like, okay, I'm having this thought. Is this thought actually helpful to me? I'm not going to let you stay here. And so having that, and it takes time and practice and you still lose it once in a while, right?
Of course, yeah.
But to be able to have that system to understand how you can protect your mind yourself, right?
That's right. And even when people did come into our villages, the ceremony of the welcoming ceremony, like they would smudge them and give them new clothing. So that energy that they were bringing in was going to be
like clean them off
and be good energy.
That kind of comes back to my personal hope that we have that put in place. So there's that dance called the standing quiver dance, right? I don't know if you know that one. But it's when the men would go out and they would go hunting or go doing whatever they were doing, and then they would come back. They would have to be kind of like cleaned off.
Yeah.
Right? And so that standing quiver, they would stand their quivers up and then start dancing around them, right? And then the people would come from the village and greet them there and kind of like clean them off before they brought them back in. So for our communities that have had so many children and families displaced by those colonial policies and poverty and everything else that comes along with it, that how do we now take something like that and I wouldn't say modernize it, but have it reflect the needs of the people, right? As part of the healing.
Do you want to do your poem?
Okay. So what happened was when all of that stuff was going on about the Pope and people were like angry or hurt or disappointed or still very protective. And so it was like watching it and witnessing it was just, I don't even have a word for it. But I just sat down and this came out. See, I took when they canonized, I think that's what they call it, canonized Saint Gadali.
Mm-hmm.
I took that as kind of a pacifier. Mm-hmm. they knew that these stories were going to be coming out, so they had to do something to really engage the people that they knew would protect, and so they gave them something, right?
And again, just to let people know, they made Gatari, she's Mohawk, and they made her a saint.
Yeah, and this was like 400 years after she had died, I think.
Yeah.
Like quite a long time.
Right.
So, and when they did that, to me, it was just like a pacifier.
Yeah.
Right? They saw the truth was looming. Saint Gadali then was raised, a pacifying gesture, and so the church was praised. We thank you, Holy Father, for our eyes to truly see. Absolve your church and clergy to set their spirits free. Scant heartfelt retribute, an olive branch of tin, like captors' scripted rusty words, mock apology for sin. Young spirits that might sense pretentious cathedral walls, your words too precious for our ears, now pour like waterfalls. The Vatican held court, like jury, judge, and throne. Your incongruous message fell, like manna made of stone. Inmate children comforted with only fear and shame, issued matching uniforms, deprived of love and name. We hear you, Holy Father, and know this to be true. Our ancestors protect and guide us. We have never needed you.
Oof.
A reconciliation, I'm not a part of that. I think we can be gentle, and we have to speak the truth.
Yeah.
And we can be clear and not fear to be thrown in jail or anything like that. I don't think I'm going to hell because I wrote this. I'll let you know.
Right. Come visit.
But I mean, they're just other people, right? And so it's like all this stuff about, the Pope is this or that. And it's like, he's just a person. And there have been many persons before him in that role. And they're all just people. They're people that really, I think, disguise themselves as holy people in our communities. And other people that disguise themselves as teachers in our communities. There are good teachers. There are good people who have really strong beliefs and live good lives, right? That wasn't who they sent to us. Those aren't the ones that they sent. And I don't mean all teachers. Let me clarify that. I mean the ones that caused harm were the ones that had disguised themselves and caused a lot of harm in our communities. So this just kind of fell out, right? This poem. And so I thought, and it was hard for me because I didn't know whether I did post it and I sent it to a few people and stuff. I think it's important to always come from a place of love and come from a place of peace, friendship, and respect. But give me a break. I'm not going to pretend that any of that was anything less than what it was. And it was a show.
And okay, so like I said, I feel like you're giving me so many new articulations of things. The fact that people spent so much time and spend so much time and energy kind of demanding or begging for some kind of apology. Are you saying we don't need that because we know who we are?
The apology, okay, some people need to hear that, right? And not to take away from anything somebody else needs. But when we are protected by other things already, then hearing him, I don't even think he really apologized, though. He apologized once he was on the plane and out of here, and it's like, okay, well, that doesn't count.
Right.
So it's like, we're going to really just be really frustrated if we think that we're going to be able to orchestrate this wonderful, magical time and they're going to go along with it, because there's no way that they can ever really, truly heal the damage that they've done in our communities.
Yeah. An apology is not action, right? Apology is not living up to responsibilities to other people. I'm just trying to reframe it and understand it because it's just, like, it really is so, it's pushing on me in a really important way. I just feel like it's so full of truth, what you're saying. So thank you for that. So you've just been doing this amazing work. We were going to talk about the painting that we're looking at here above us, and it's a really big painting. And you said this is one of your earliest paintings?
Yep. It's a painting of a woman pounding corn, and she's got a basket beside her, a corn wash basket, and she's standing in front of a log house. And it's called Uncle Louie's alarm clock.
Tell me more about that.
Okay. So Uncle Louie was my grandmother's first cousin, and he was a muskrat hunter. And the story is that he would set his traps, and then he would go to bed, and early in the morning, his mother would wake up about 5 o'clock in the morning, and she would start pounding corn because she was going to use it for cooking for that day, for making cornbread. And so that's one of those little tiny memories that is probably going to be fading out within this generation, that it would wake him up. Because through the neighborhood, there would be that thump, thump, thump echoing through the neighborhood, right? And she wouldn't be the only one. There would be different corn pounders being used. And so that's one of those ancestral understandings or memories that will be forgotten if it wasn't captured. And so when I was trying to figure out how to capture it or what I wanted to paint, that's where that came from. And so it's a woman pounding corn, and it's called Uncle Louie's alarm clock because that's what would wake him up. And then he'd go check his muskrat traps.
Can you talk about that a little bit more, of this moment that would be lost? What does that mean to you?
Something's innate about it, and I don't know how to describe it. One of the things that happens is that there's people that are struggling with their identity, or they find out they're part Native, and then they read a whole bunch of books and they get everything all smushed together, and they're telling you all this stuff, and it's like, really? Yeah, so it can be confusing. And so I hear this phrase a lot, or this term, they call it lived experience. Mm-hmm. And so those are the things that are going to be important for all of our families to remember, because they only exist here, and they are the things that they wanted to rob us of those memories. So it might seem pretty insignificant to maybe most people, but it was like one of those little memories that I had. I heard people talking about it, how Aunt Emmy would wake up early in the morning and she would pound corn, and it would echo through the neighborhood. And then her son would wake up and go check his traps. And I was like, you hear it in different versions and that. And I just really wanted to capture it.
Oh, it's so nice. And it's the preciousness of that moment. To me, it seems like about the material, about the action of the tools that were used. And then also this relationship. Like, I know it's what you were saying earlier about that predictability, that something's going to happen. I can rest and go to sleep and know that I'll be awakened to go check my traps.
Right. There's that humility there too with the log house, because there was no hydro, right? And so one of the things that we take for granted is if you go into the kitchen, there's going to be a couple of lights on, maybe the microwave light, maybe that buzzing from the fridge. Maybe there's a light where there's ice that comes out of your fridge door, something like that. So all of those things are an expectation now, right? So what happened, kind of like during the lockdown, right? When there was no planes in the air, there were no cars on the road. And in those days, there were no cars and there were no planes, and there was no buzzing of the fridge, and there were no laptops or cell phone lights. There was nothing, right? And so that real humble place where our families came from, and they survived and they thrived. And Emmy was a cucumber farmer, and she used to take cucumbers, she'd grow them and then take them to York Farms in Brantford and sell them York Farms, and they would make pickles out of them, right? So it's like another one of those little snapshots that possibly nobody would care to know about, but it's like,
and retell.
Yeah. But I think it's pretty precious, because if you ever picked cucumbers, they're brutal. They have all those little pickers on it, and it's like really rough, right? So it's like the things that our people did to survive are just amazing,
Yeah. And the telling of the story is somebody just remembering that we live off of those relationships too, and we live off of those little moments of the tools and the care, right?
Yeah. Well, the other thing that happens too is that people have this like just magical someone in their family that we were at some place. I won't even tell you where it was, but it wasn't here. And someone was talking about how every summer they went home and the elders gathered them around and taught them the stories. And it's like, well, that's pretty convenient, And it's like, we lived here and nobody did that with us. Like, did that really happen?
Right.
And so it sounds good and it sounds like, perfect scene for a movie someplace, but it's like, I don't know. So it makes you kind of skeptical of listening to the people that have those like magical moments. And it's like, I just didn't believe it when they were saying this.
Because it's romantic.
Very romantic and very like, and then this would happen. And it's like, ooh, that sounds lovely. It's like, yeah. And it's very convenient, right? Yeah. Conveniently, this would happen. And it's like, I actually, not only did that not happen with me, but I don't ever remember anybody saying anything like that ever, right? Mm-hmm. And even like telling the stories, what I remember was if the adults were going to sit around and talk about any kind of important stories like that, you got kicked out of the house.
Yeah.
Right? And it wasn't even, partly in the generation before, it was because they didn't want the kids to learn the language. Right? And then when the adults didn't use the language and they had anything to talk about that was important, a lot of kids got kicked out because it was for our protection, because everybody was so afraid of anything, right? Of everything, because it was all against the law. And when we were growing up, we used to go and live on these tobacco farms, and my parents and even us kids worked on tobacco farms. Same thing with strawberry farms. And at one point it was like, I don't ever remember being embarrassed about it, but I remember wondering, how come all the farmers are white? Mm-hmm. How come everybody that's working on these farms are all from the community? What happened? Aren't we Indians? Isn't this our land? And then you get like, you can't ask questions like that, So it's like, that was it. Because probably nobody explained, because who would explain that?
I can only imagine you as a child, like so curious and so...
Yeah, but not being allowed to ask questions,
right?
So it's like, and then so it's like, what do you do other than just kind of like,
do art, right?
Well, when you're a kid, you just pick another flat of berries, Yeah.
Oh, wow. Well, what gonna waradu? Thank you for your perceptions, and thank you for offering us different ways of thinking and so many things to think about and look at. And honestly, one of my favorite things to do is come to Everything Cornhusk and sit with you, because I feel like you're a true auntie in our community who is offering this as a lifelong learner, like you said, not as somebody who's holding power or holding court at all. No. I think that's the great joy of speaking to you, is that we're all learning and sharing with each other. So, yeah, let's go eat.